Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast. I'm Amy Geddes here with Sam Johnson, and we are welcoming to our show today Dean Kaelin. Dean is the founder of IVTOM and an incredible master voice teacher. He's basically taught anyone and everyone who's been a celebrity that's come out of Utah and then some. And we are so excited to have him on the show today. He's going to tell us a little bit more about his journey. And today we'll be discussing what is mix. So go ahead, Dean. Can you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about you?
Well, my journey's been kind of interesting because I never planned on being a voice teacher. It kind of found me. I grew up more of an instrumentalist. I did sing when I was 3 years old. My mom got me lined up with this other little 3-year-old, and we used to go around singing in churches and rest homes. So I had good pitch. By the time I was 5, I was singing the harmonies. But because of that, I never had to sing high. I was always the harmony singer. But I was mostly an instrumentalist, played piano, bass, guitar, whatever instrument I could find. And so I started recording when I was 14, put my first band together when I was 10. And by default, because I had done some singing, I was the lead singer of the band. I never took any voice lessons because the only voice lessons you could take when I was a kid was opera. And opera was kind of a dirty word to me when I was a kid. I wanted to be a rock guy or jazz or something. I was going to be famous. I'm a year younger than Donny Osmond and Michael Jackson. So I kind of grew up watching them and thinking, oh, that could be me. I could do that. Started writing songs when I was 7. So anyway, by default, I became kind of lead singer of all these bands I was putting together. And there was a couple of problems. First of all, we didn't have good equipment, so we didn't have a good PA and no monitors. But also, like I said, I didn't take any voice lessons because the only lessons you could take was opera. And I'd heard opera people try to sing pop and rock before, and it just didn't ever sound good to me. And the guys on the radio just sounded normal. It didn't sound like they had taken lessons. So basically, all I knew about singing is if I yelled louder, I got a higher note. And that was the big problem with my singing, is that I couldn't sing high. I couldn't sing as high as the guys on the radio. And so I was either transposing the songs lower to try to sing them or just trying to scream. And if I got really good and warmed up and yelled really loud, I could sort of get the high notes. But all the way through, we were playing sometimes during the holiday seasons up to 4 times a week. And we're doing like 3-hour times. We played for a lot of dances and parties. And at the end of 3 hours, it was kind of like, because I just yelled for 3 hours. And so by the time I was 18, I totally destroyed my voice. I didn't know enough about my voice to know I destroyed it. But if I did a scale, literally it would go like, ah, then it would just cut out. My goal vocally was to be able to go, ah, because I couldn't. I had no head tone whatsoever. Long story, I took some time off, served a religious mission over in Africa, and that kind of gave my voice time to recover. Not why I went, but it was kind of a nice byproduct. And then when I came home, I thought, I got to figure this out. I can hear guys doing it. I can hear people singing high, and it doesn't sound like they're straining. It doesn't sound like they're hurting their voice, and it doesn't sound like they're going to a different voice. And so I got to figure this out. So I kind of started on that journey, and fortunately, I got the opportunity after I got a degree in college in jazz composition. And I thought that my calling in life was to be a musical director. Like most all the stars have an instrumentalist, a piano player, a guitar player that kind of runs the band and kind of organize that so that they can just sing. And I figured that's what I could do. So I headed down and I got a really great job being an accompanist for a real famous voice teacher. His name is Seth Riggs. And he was being criticized pretty heavily at the time because he was working, but he was the first guy I came across that would work vocal technique with popular styles of music. But he was really doing some things that were really different than the traditional music. Although he was trained classically himself, he had kind of the same thing as, I want to sing high without hurting my voice and straining, and how do I do that? And so he tells some funny stories about when he was in the Navy working night duty, and he would just kind of sit there and try to experiment with different sounds, trying to figure out how to do it. And he would listen to cows and hear them go, and he would try to imitate different sounds. And he sort of kind of figured out a bunch of things. And so I happened to get the job of his piano player, his accompanist. So I sat there 8 hours a day and watched him teach. And he was working with some of the most famous singers at the time, Barbra Streisand, Jackson, Stevie Wonder, on and on. So I was playing for their piano lessons and listening to him teach. And it got to a point after a while that I could say, oh, he's going to stop him here. He's going to tell him to do this. And then I said to him, I said, would you be willing to teach me? I was real hesitant because I thought I'm a nobody. Why did you teach me? And he said, sure. Guess he figured you'd rather teach me than pay me. So I started taking lessons from him. Well, long story short, I decided I didn't really like LA. I didn't want to be on the road the rest of my life. I was 22 and single, but decided, I wanted to have kids and stuff. And I thought I don't want to be on the road all the time. So I ended up moving back to Utah, not knowing if I'd be able to do music or anything. I kind of thought I might be giving music up. It was really, really traumatic. But anyway, once I got back to Salt Lake, I had all these people that heard my voice and heard the difference and the improvement and say, wow, that's really cool. What are you doing? And they found out that I'd been working with Seth. And so I started doing a few favors for friends and friends of friends. And within about 4 months, I had about a 40-student waiting list. And I went, no, I'm not a voice teacher. I don't teach voice. But then it occurred to me that there's rarely a voice problem that walks through the door that I didn't personally experience or go through myself. And so I thought, well, that really gives me a lot of kind of advantage because I don't have to ask them, how does that feel or what's going on? Because I've been there. So I thought, well, maybe I could be a voice teacher. And so I called down to and I said, hey, all these people want me to teach them. Is that okay? And he says, yeah, you know what you're doing. And he says, so it's okay. So he kind of mentored me a little bit. And that's kind of where the journey began. And that was 40 years ago. My attitude was, well, people are, I liked writing, arranging, doing all this other kind of music stuff. And all these people were asking me. And I thought, well, when they stop asking me, I'll do something else. So they want me to help them. And I like teaching. I enjoyed helping people. But really my attitude was just, when they stop asking, we'll do something else, but they just keep asking. In fact, I've actually been trying to, my plan was when I was about 56 to slow down and get back into writing and arranging music, stuff I like doing but doesn't make any money. But people keep asking, so it's a little harder to get out of it than I thought it was. But anyway, that was kind of my journey. I think there's probably a couple other things in there, but it's been really interesting. Over the last 40 years, I've had the opportunity to teach all over the world. It's been really a blessing. It's been really amazing. And it doesn't matter where I go, what style of music people do, what language they speak. All singers kind of want to do the same thing. I want to go from my low, just like I did. I want to go from my low voice to my high voice without straining, without yelling, without hurting my voice, without flipping into falsetto, all those kinds of things. And fortunately, that was something that I was able to luck onto early on. And what Seth was doing that was so brand new at the time, and he was kind of so criticized, has almost become kind of mainstream. This concept of what people have started calling mix, or blended voice, or whatever. There's a bunch of different names for it. To me, it's just pure singing. I basically tell people all we're trying to do is get the body in as relaxed, open condition as possible and allow it to do what it was designed to do. Anyway, maybe it's more information than you wanted, but that's kind of my history.
I was just going to say, can you give us a definition? What qualifies as good singing? I mean, you kind of described it a minute ago, but if you had to, say it's three things, a combination of these three things, what could somebody say? I have these three elements. This makes good singing.
Well, let me do it a couple of different ways. First of all, again, the term that, as I mentioned before, that this has kind of been given is mix. And the reason and I actually don't like categorizing things. It wouldn't matter to me if you came in my studio, if you want to sing opera or heavy metal or country or jazz or Broadway. I teach you the same technique. To me, good singing is good singing. However, how we adapt that changes the styles. So obviously, we can get into that today pretty dramatically. But sometimes the placement of the vowels, how you approach it, the balance of the coordination changes. But the idea of mix, how that word kind of got developed, and this is probably my most important point that I'll probably make this whole podcast, is that we just get rid of the whole terms chest voice and head voice. I think it just messes people up. And I understand why they started, because you feel sound, you feel lower notes down lower in your body and higher notes higher in your body. And so it feels like the sound is moving. What you're really feeling is sympathetic vibrations. The sound doesn't really go up and down your body, it just feels like it does. And so what happened is people were trying to describe how they felt. And so they called, this feeling is chest voice. But what they do is they associate a sound with a feeling. And that's not always accurate. So chest voice is basically, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but your vocal cords are kind of together. So when you speak lower in your range, and you use the full length and thickness of your vocal cords, the vocal cords come together. We've kind of learned to associate that as a chest voice sound. And then when people try to go higher, what they tend to do is tighten those vocal cords. That's what I was doing, trying to yell to get higher notes. Straining, basically. And by using those muscles, you can kind of stretch those cords and get some higher notes out of it. Kind of like trying to get a higher note on a guitar by tightening the string, or the piano, same thing. The problem is you're going to get a stopping point. Vocal cords are very stretchy, but so they're way stretchier than guitar strings or piano strings. But eventually you're going to hit that same stopping point where you can't do anymore. So then what happens? Well, if you keep going, the string actually breaks. Now, luckily for us, vocal cords don't break. They just break apart. So we've kind of learned to associate the sound of the vocal cords having less resistance to being a head voice sound and having more resistance with a chest voice sound. And so what most people tend to do just by nature, by what we were born with for some reason, this whole feeling of yelling or something, we tend to, down in our lower range, our speaking range, we have pretty good chord closure, not too much resistance, just enough to keep those cords together, and the vibration goes along the full length of the vocal cord. And so you're able to get a nice relaxed sound. But then as you go higher, as they add that tension, they get too much tension. Sounds bigger than it's kind of tight. Then they get to a point where they can't tighten it anymore. Start going flat. So then they have to let go of all the resistance. So we learn to call that head voice and learn to call that chest voice. And really, maybe it's good that people do that, because I probably wouldn't have a job if they didn't. But we really just need to get rid of head voice and chest voice. But this idea of mix is that it's sort of a combination of both in a way. In other words, we want to keep the chords together, but we want to get some relaxation in there as well. But as far as the elements that you're talking about, what's really fascinating to me is that really the singer it can be very complicated once you get into formants and harmonics and all the muscles and everything that they're in, but it doesn't have to. Really, the singer just controls three things: flow, resistance on the vocal folds, and the vocal tract, or the mouth and the throat. The sound starts at the vocal cords, ends at the lips, basically. So as we control those three things, air, muscle, vowel, we are able to get all these different sounds and such. And finding a balance between those three things is what allows for what I call good singing, so that I can go from my low notes to my high notes. There's no other instrument that I know that changes sounds halfway through. When you play a piano, that's a low note, it's a long fat string. That's a high note, it's a short skinny string, but they have kind of the same quality of sound. Why? Because the resistance tends to be pretty much the same all the way through, same on a violin or a piano. So the idea with singing is that if we can keep the airflow consistent, if we can keep the resistance consistent, and I guess and if we can keep that vocal tract in a good position, the body just is pretty amazing, and it does what it was designed to do. It's almost like, this is not entirely accurate, but it's almost like when you're learning to play the violin, you're learning or the guitar, where do I put my fingers? And you're kind of shortening and lengthening the string, but yet the tension on the string doesn't change. And that's sort of what happens in the body. And again, it gets more complicated than that if you really want to get into that part. But the key thing to the singers is that you can go from a low note to a high note without changing the quality of sound, so that you have a speech-like quality kind of sound. So in my own voice, I did it wrong the first time, if I can do it right. People are always talking about the breaks in the voice. There was no break in my voice there. I was able to go from a low note to a high note, and it didn't change sounds. Now, if I increase the tension, it's all going to shut out, or I'm going to strain. If I let go of the tension, Now, when I get good at playing with those balances, I can do it like, that's still connected. It sounds more like falsetto or more like a head voice, but it's still a connected sound. You can tell if you're connected because your vocal cords are covered with something very similar to your skin. So there's a little bit of scratchiness when they come together. We kind of like that. That gives us good emotion, particularly in popular music. And when they come apart too much, you don't really hear that. You don't really get that. So that's some of the exercises that we can maybe even get into in a second that will help people do it. But maybe the best way is just to demonstrate really quick. I've got a couple of samples here. Let me just show you really quick a couple of people.
So really quick, just to recap for our listeners. So what you're saying is basically there's three elements that you control as a singer. You've got the airflow, you've got the vibration of the vocal folds, and then you have the shape of your vocal tract. And when those things are in balance, then you're mixing.
Yeah, but let me change that slightly. We're looking at resistance on your vocal folds or chord closure, which leads to the vibration of the vocal cords. Mm-hmm. So again, it's air, muscle, vowel, if you want to really simplify it there. So yes, the balance of the air and the muscle leads to the vibration of the vocal cords. And we want to have a nice free vibration of the vocal cords, not a forced vibration of the vocal cords. And again, this doesn't matter for whatever style you're singing. So let me show you really quick. Here's just a guy. This is a guy from Brazil, and here's just a warm up just to show you.
These are students of yours, Dean?
Real quick. Yeah, he's a teacher. Now he pushes a little bit on this one. He doesn't need to do that, but then he catches himself up. That just shows it's so smooth it doesn't ever change quality or anything. Now, we can change that quality depending on how we adjust those three elements that I was talking about. But for right now, we won't get into that part. That's more of a stylistic concern. But that's the main thing. That's what's provided me a career the last 40 years. Because every singer I know all over the world, that's what they want to do. They want to go from their low voice to their high voice without changing voice. Otherwise, if you have to go to your head voice, quote unquote, or your falsetto, well, every time you go high, you've lost all your power, you've lost all your natural sound. Let me just give you a couple of really quick examples. This is a 12-year-old female that I worked with. And again, it's a little unusual that she's got a pretty mature voice, but she sings rock and roll. It was a 12-year-old. So again, those are notes that we would normally associate with head voice, but she was going, that wouldn't work for that style of music at all. So you have to get those. And even in my male voice, I can get those notes as well by just allowing my vocal cords to make those adjustments. Let me give you just a couple more really quick, just to give you quick examples. Here's a 13-year-old girl singing Broadway.
Can anybody see? Is anybody waving back at me? Is anybody waving?
And she's not yelling.
It's interesting, like just
she's
to the ear, it sounds like she could be singing an A or a B, but then you look at the piano and she's up at an E flat just because the quality doesn't change. And so often I can just tell kind of where someone is in their range because of those quality changes. So it's really cool when you don't hear that.
Yeah. Let me give you this one. Here's a 14-year-old that's a country singer.
Well, you say I'm a man just to fit your plans, but does a barnyard shovel fit your hand? If you're looking at me.
And she did go light for an effect there. But yeah, see, that's head voice. But it doesn't sound like what people usually personally call head voice. So all head voice means that you feel it in your head. All chest voice means you feel it in your chest. And if you leave it at that, it's fine. Anyway, but that's a couple of kind of examples. I've got a bunch more that I can give you, both in Broadway and in a little bit more religious or classical, or in pop or country, all that kind of stuff. But that gives you a basic idea of what I consider good singing and what I consider mix, and what I think Seth Riggs started, and I think we know a lot more now than what he was doing. But that whole desire of just being able to sing smoothly through that range. And actually, what's really interesting is he was listening back to some of his favorite singers. The earliest recordings, I have some really old recordings of bel canto singers in the very early 1900s. And he was hearing a different sound then than he was hearing from the current opera singers. The current opera singers got to a point where they were just really muscling. Oh, everything was way too heavy. And he goes, no, that's not the beautiful singing that I heard. And so his attempt was not even really to do pop at first. It was to try to get that nice, beautiful tone and that smooth tone that he heard in some of those, like Geely, some of those really early opera singers that we have recordings of that was just so smooth. And then he then adapted that for popular music because he found that there were so many pop and rock and country singers that were hurting their voice and straining that information as well.
So yeah, my question's kind of about we can't escape people using chest voice and head voice as much as I think that it might be nice. And I've found that trying to use connected or held on versus flipped kind of helps people understand the difference of like how we can have this chesty sound up in a place that you would probably feel it not in your chest. But how have you, do you have any sort of tricks to help people disconnect and get to?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't get away from the terms because they're so used, so we have to be aware of them. But it's sort of like translating into a different language. So what I care about, what I try to do is I try to give certain coordinate people exercises, tricks you could call them if you want, to get them to feel nations and certain feelings. And then name that whatever they want. Right? There's a funny story. There was a girl I was working with in Australia one time. She was 13 years old. She had just gotten done screaming Annie for 3 months. That's how come up. She was just screaming. And unfortunately, young voices can kind of get away with screaming once in a while. But she really got locked into that. But as a result, she couldn't sing up to a high G or anything. She was just screaming up to like D's and E flats. And it really was not a great sound. And it was going to tire out her voice. And as her voice got bigger and she matured more, she was going to have some real problems. And like I said, most times I can get people into a good place pretty quickly. But it took me 2.5 hours over the space of about 3 days with this girl. She was just fighting me. Finally, after 2.5 hours, she finally got it. And I said, okay, that's it. I said, what does that feel like? And she says, it feels like I'm squeezing a lemon. And I said, okay, let's squeeze that lemon. And every time she fell out, I said, remember to squeeze the lemon. And she'd get right back into it again. Now, I've never used that with any other student, nor will I. But to her, that meant something. So I don't have a problem with people calling something what it feels like. But for me to tell students, hey, make sure you get that squeeze the lemon feeling, that's going to be a mess. And that's kind of, I think, what we've done with head and chest voice. So I think of it as a term of translation. So we need to be aware of those terms and what people mean by them.
So going back to that example you showed of the Brazilian singer, what do you think about how accents affect people's ability to learn some of this stuff? Because I know that in Portuguese there is a little bit of that nasality with some things, and I heard some of that in his voice, and I know that's really been helpful for me.
Great question. And I wouldn't have thought of that question to address it. So that was a great question. I often refer this to, you have your normal accent and you need to develop your singer's accent. And I say, you listen to a lot of British people and they have this huge accent and they sound funny. And then they sing and they just sound normal. And you think, okay, what just happened there? Really funny kind of story. The first time I went and taught in the UK, I thought I had died and gone to heaven because their vowels, the way they talk, was so much better than Americans as a group, as far as good singing goes. Now, I realize there's a lot of weird British accents, so I'm not talking about Cockney and all that stuff. These were people that just had really nice, proper British accents, kind of like the news reporters, And it's sort of similar in America. Most of the news reporters have kind of just generic kind of accents that way. But anyway, it was so much easier for them to mix because the way they said their vowels and the way they spoke was a lot closer to where they should be when they sing. And then I came back to America and everybody's talking like this again. And, a lot of pressure on their voice and a lot of really weird vowels and, wondering, okay, why can't I get through my bridges? And so it's almost like, you want to develop kind of a different singer's accent. So sometimes if you can take somebody out of that, say, give me a British accent, sometimes it's easier. You'll often find the students going, I can do the exercises great, but when I go to the songs, it all falls apart. And that's a lot of it. It's because when you're doing the exercise, you're just making weird sounds, and your brain doesn't fight you. But also when you're doing words, you want to go back to your speaking accent, which is not necessarily in a good place. But with my own voice, it's really interesting because when I first started teaching 40 years ago, I would teach for 2 hours and go hoarse. And I thought, this is really bothering me. Why am I going hoarse? I'm singing properly. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And I realized that I had kind of a typical Utah accent, and I was kind of excited, and I was speaking like this. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there's a lot of pressure in my voice like this. If I do this for 20 minutes, my voice is going to be kind of gone. Okay, so here I am all day working with singers saying, okay, let's open that up. Let's relax it. Let's get that larynx down. Let's get those vowels nice and round. And I'm exaggerating. I'm kind of talking like this. And I realized after about 10 years that my speaking voice had changed. I now speak and sing the same way. Whereas before, I was speaking this way and then singing this way, which was hard. And that's why it's tough for people to jump from exercises to songs, because they want to go back to their speaking accent, which is not necessarily a good one. As far as Spanish and Portuguese, they have a problem with their ah vowels because they do more of an ah vowel. And so this is, I guess, what's the word, very arrogant of me that I go to these countries that I don't even speak the language and I tell them how to pronounce their words. And but I do know what vowels are going to work and about what vowels aren't going to work. And so I'm telling them, okay, you can't do that and get a good sound. It's just not going to work. It doesn't allow the body to get in the right balance. And this way, and they always say, yeah, but that's not how we pronounce it. I go, I know, but it doesn't matter. I said, the audience will still hear that, but you got those little modifications. So yeah, I think that's a real good point as far as the accent.
Something that's pretty interesting about that is like teaching someone in their native language. There's usually a lot more resistance to changing it. And since I work primarily with English speakers, as soon as we get up into any part of their range that we might need to make a vowel modification, it's very, very difficult for people to kind of knock it out of their speaking accent. And that can be really hard. And at the other end of it, like, I remember we were working on a classical piece together for one of my juries or something, and I just had such a strong conception of what classical music needed to sound like, and it was kind of wrecking me, and it took a long time to kind of get out of that, but you had me sing it like a country piece, and then suddenly it was way easier. And then one of my other teachers at Westminster, like, he heard me singing some mid-2000s emo music, and he was like, sing Nessun Dorma like that. And then suddenly it was just so much easier. But my mind was like, no, this is illegal to sing this kind of music this way. It's just not going to be any of the right sounds. It's just interesting how making one little mental shift like that can be so helpful.
Yeah, and this is a whole other too, but singing is so mental. I've always said it's 80% psychological. And I just picked that out of the hat. But so much of it is just muscle memory and, perception and what we think we should do and what is, we really need to do.
I agree. Well, we are getting close to the end here. Dean, we just want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We're definitely going to have you back because I think our audience loves hearing from you. I know I do. I can just sit here in awe, like, just teach me, Dean. Tell me all the things, and then my life will be better because now I know more. And I think our listeners can take a little piece of you home with your book. You've allowed us to send a free chapter to anybody who signs up. If you are already a voice teacher and you don't have Dean's book, Teaching Good Singing, you can download it from his website. We'll put a link in the show notes. But also, if you just sign up for our email list, we will send you a free chapter of Dean's book, Teaching Good Singing. And it's really incredible. I have used it for years, and I've helped other teachers get their teaching going just by following the principles in the book. Really, teaching good singing. It's mix. Mix is good singing. So that's what we want to do, make the world better by
For a long time,
singing.
I would read that book like cover to cover once a week.
Oh, wow.
Just because I'm like this. Yeah, and every once in a while I'll still go back to a few of the chapters in the middle or like pull up that chart and just have it in front of me again, just to kind of remind me.
Well, we love it. It's like getting a personal lesson from Dean every chapter. It's like, oh, I can just hear your voice in it. I feel like you're just in my head teaching me as I go. And it's great. I love it. So anyway, anything you want to add, gentlemen?
No, thanks for inviting me. Like I said, I think that's kind of true with anything. When you find something that really changes your life and helps you, you want to share it with others. So I've been real grateful that I've had the opportunity to help people. It's really been really interesting.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll definitely do more. We need to have you on as much as you'll allow.
We'll take any info Dean is willing to teach us.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, for watching. Go check out Dean's book at his website, Teaching Good Singing. It is my Bible. And go check out the show notes for a link where you can get a free chapter of that if you just sign up for our email list. And then come back next week. We appreciate any sorts of thumbs ups, likes, subscribes, ratings, all of those things. Thank you, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IVTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IVTOM at ivtom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast.